are here today with Philippe Magnabosco, Cybersecurity Officer at ENISA. And so thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So first, can you explain the key provisions of the EU Cybersecurity Act?
There are in fact many key provisions in the EU Cybersecurity Act, one of which, or a series of which rather, actually provides new legal ground for ENISA. So that's the first chapters of the Cybersecurity Act. But what really interests us today is the part on certification. That are interesting us today is the provisions on cybersecurity certification, by which the CSA, and that was one of the parts that was most debated why it was being drafted, creates a framework for cybersecurity certification in Europe, recognizing that cybersecurity takes good supplies, a good supply of cybersecurity products or cyber secure products, and we need to have this supply for the benefit of European customers, citizens, organizations, businesses across the Union, as a union, and not just in a handful of countries that have a history of cybersecurity, that have mutual agreements, but to make it a little bit more union-like. So the Cybersecurity Act creates this certification schemes, or these certification schemes, and provides information on how they should be developed, on the governance of them, and specifically, and that's particularly interesting for us today, mentions that those schemes should be based on the requirements present in international, European, or international standards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you mentioned that the aim is to have a single cybersecurity certificate, and you mentioned organization, businesses, consumers. So what are the benefits for these different groups?
Well, the benefits is clarity on the market. The most immediate benefit actually is for vendors who propose products with cybersecurity features, because they have just one certificate to pass and access the whole market. So from their point of view, it's a difference from what would happen before, where in some countries you would have to pass a certificate, in some others you would have to pass another certificate with limited mutual recognition. So that the cybersecurity certification framework paves the way towards that. We're not there yet, because we're only beginning to put that in place, but that's the aim. As for the users of products, it's probably going to give us a better offer with more comparable offers as well. We are also thinking about labeling products to make them more identifiable for customers. We're not talking necessarily about off-the-shelf product for end users, but even for a procurement in a small or medium sized company, it's hard to find your way through the jungle of cybersecurity features, and it's even better when those cybersecurity features are streamlined, presented in a way that is consistent across vendors, and if they are vetted by an organization that says what's in the tin is what's on the tin. So that's the main benefits that I see are these. Going further than that, this is a framework that we're talking about, and the Cybersecurity Act has proposed that there are 3 levels of what we call cybersecurity assurance: basic, substantial, and high. And the purpose is to have those 3 levels deployed consistently across the very wide array of possible products with cybersecurity features. Cybersecurity should be everywhere, because IT is everywhere. And we are now focusing on 3 schemes, but in the future, who knows, we might have sectoral schemes for specific branches of the industry or specific lines of products that we don't necessarily think about today. The CSA, the regulation, is pretty open on this. And having a consistent approach to these 3 levels, they don't look very detailed. It's just 3 levels. But having them deployed consistently is both a challenge and an opportunity, we believe, for the market, the users.
Okay. So you mentioned certification schemes. So what is the role of ENISA in development of this process?
Right. One important thing is that the initiative of developing a scheme does not come from ENISA, but rather from the European Commission, which is a more directly politically responsible organization. ENISA is a technical agency. That said, ENISA is not a segment of the European Commission in the sense that we have our own governance where member states are represented. The governance that has been organized by the regulation for certification opens a place for member states and for stakeholders. There's something called the Stakeholders Cybersecurity Certification Group, SCCG, alongside the member state who is represented in the European Cybersecurity Certification Group, ECCG, sorry about all the acronyms, and the SCCG, the stakeholders, where incidentally the three ESOs, the European Standards Developing Organizations, are represented, have a very strong advisory role in developing this. So the role of ENISA is to receive those requests, to maintain and operate the governance that has been proposed by the regulation, and creates the working groups, engaging stakeholders, inviting applications to take part in the working groups. And of course, the bulk of the work is actually putting these people to work, working with them in order to develop the actual certification schemes. And beyond that, there's the technical content, there's the technical community to manage, and beyond that, interfacing with the legal side of things, because cybersecurity certification schemes will be legal documents of the EU. They will be published as implementation acts, which are legal instruments in the EU legal order. So we need to have this interface that goes all the way from legal to standards, to stakeholders directly experience realities. So there's a lot of different vocabularies, a lot of different point of views that have to be brought together. It's quite a piece of work, and ENISA does that. But at every way, we're talking with the European Commission, we're talking with standards organizations, we're talking with stakeholders, vendors, users. We're basically in the middle of everything. We don't do things alone ever. We couldn't, basically, but that's what makes it interesting.
And you mentioned 3 focus areas for now. Which are those, and can you explain a bit more?
Yeah, sure. There are 3. At the moment, there are 3 schemes that have been requested by the European Commission. The first is common criteria, which is directed at products. It is, in fact, a European avatar of certification schemes that exist and have existed for decades now, internationally, that's based on ISO standard, based on international standards. Previously, those schemes were recognized only across a handful of European countries at a good level, and at a lesser level with outside of Europe countries, such as the USA, for instance. This changes the game a little bit in the sense that we're going to have this scheme for the whole of Europe. But it was the easy part, between quotes, because it wasn't that easy, but it was easy in the sense that we already had the standards, we already knew what we were doing, we had some sort of governance going on, so we were not starting from scratch. So this was the first one. Common criteria is a very versatile approach to certifying the cybersecurity of products. It is, however, something that is more targeted at high level or substantial level evaluations. It's probably not the first approach in order to certify the cybersecurity of a connected bread toaster, for instance. It's not the way it's made. But we have this, and it's a product-based approach. The next is the EU CES, which is on cloud services. So cloud, very important in and of itself, and services, which is also very important in and of itself, because that's the first scheme we have developed, talking about services. It's a different worlds, different kind of stakeholders, different kind of market surveillance, different kind of thinking. So that's very interesting as well. And the third one is EU 5G, which is on mobile security, where the focus was on using standards, very rapidly evolving ones, because the technology is evolving very rapidly, that are developed by international organizations, some of which have formal status recognized by the European Union as a standards developing organization, some of which don't have it. So it's a whole different sort of set of challenges. it's also the first time that anybody has done anything like that. So there's a lot of eyes looking at us right now and trying to see how this is developing. Besides those three, I should say that ENISA also has an activity in a more forward-looking, prospective way. We are ahead of the curve, actually, looking at upcoming pieces of legislation, looking at upcoming technologies, and we are looking at whether there should be a certification scheme on them, if there should be one, how do we do it, with whom do we do it, what are the difficulties, and what are the standards that exist, or those that don't exist. So, in a sense, some sort of a prospective feasibility study approach to things. Very often we realize that things already exist, so we don't mean to propose or to develop certification schemes for everything. In fact, with the three that we already have, products, services, and telecommunications, we already have some breadth of things. But in the future, we might have, as I said earlier, sectoral needs for cybersecurity certification that might reuse part of CC, common criteria, or part of the cloud services. If we're going to develop a scheme for managed services, for instance, we're going to reuse the knowledge that we've gained developing a scheme for cloud services, for the services part of it. So we're still creating the basics.
Okay. So what would you say is the process or the life cycle of something from commissioning phases to some legal translation phases? How long does it take usually to develop it?
Usually is something that I can't answer because we are not done with the first process yet. So there's no precedent. The most advanced of the three schemes is EUCC because we were not starting from scratch. It is a challenge to do things like this. Using standards, I'm preempting perhaps later questions, but using standards is really part of the European Union's DNA when it comes to harmonizing the market, creating more freedom and more clarity, more legal certainty for stakeholders in the market and for the benefit of end users. Doing this through schemes, certification schemes, is a bit of a novelty. That is based on the experience of some member states, including France, the Netherlands, Germany, but it is not the usual way that the European Commission proposes to do things, and it's not the usual way that the regulations drafted by or voted by the European Parliament and the European Council are put together. So it's a bit of new territory, and we're still exploring, and it takes perhaps a little bit more time than we anticipated, the way that things must be translated into regulation. So the good news is that finally we have a draft implementing act for consultations. We've had that for 3 weeks now, I think. So we're seeing the end of the first process. It was a long one. Perhaps in the future we can expect the processes to be less protracted because the path will have been set in a way.
And you mentioned different levels of security, so basic, mid, and high. Can you elaborate a bit?
Sure. In a nutshell, basic cybersecurity is very much what it says. It is looking at having a product that is not naively open to very run-of-the-mill attacks. We're talking cybersecurity, we're talking malevolent actors, we're talking about attacks. There's a lot of common flaws that can be covered rather easily, and that's what we're addressing with basic. With substantial, we're addressing a little bit more sophisticated attacks, attacks that are made by malevolent actors that have some resources. They know newer ways of attacking products. They are a little bit more persistent. So that's the middle thing. And the high level is really targeted as preventing attacks from malevolent actors with a lot of resources. Really, the people, we're talking very high-grade attacks, people who are aware of very advanced ways of attacking products or systems, that have the resources to try and break difficult to break codes and things like that. So the high level is really not for every product.
Right.
The basic level is designed to be for any product that is susceptible to being attacked, and the middle solution is in between, of course.
Okay. Well, thank you. And what would be the main takeaway today? And how do you see maybe these initiatives shaping the cybersecurity in the EU?
Well, the EU has been very active in the past years in terms of cybersecurity. Certification is just one part of it. I think that's a very important message, and that's part actually of the time it has taken to transfer a certification scheme into an implementing act, is to really make sure that everybody understands that certification is just what it is. It is a technical evaluation. It is not a political statement about a vendor. It is not guidance about how to use a product. It's just making sure that we have certain basic or substantial or high assurance levels about a product, and that's it. It's very important, but it's only part of the picture. The rest of the picture is the Cyber Resilience Act, which has a much more larger way of covering things, and which incidentally is closer to the traditional way of the European Union of doing the single market, because it's going to rely on conformity assessment modules, much in the same way that we do on other products, for product safety, for instance. There are other pieces of legislation that are targeted at the potential victims, how they should protect themselves, their duties in that regard, and the duties of the states to protect them, and the union to protect them. I think one important thing is that it has the CSA and the certification schemes is one of the ways in which cybersecurity, which was very well handled at the member state level, becomes not just member state level, but also union level. Member states still have a very important role to play. They are the ones who are going to operate the schemes locally, and the CSA also creates national cybersecurity certification authorities who have very wide-ranging duties and prerogatives. They can do market surveillance. They can receive complaints. They can fine if there's a problem, and they have to have a very high level of trust between themselves through peer reviewing. So that's a very important way of doing things as well, raising the level of shared trusts across member states, because they are the ones who have the resources. ENISA is not that big of an organization, right? Things are going to be operated at member states level in large part. And I think that's a very interesting way of creating precedents for the future. What else is there about cybersecurity in the future? Yes, I've talked about possible sectoral pieces of legislation. There's the Draft AI Act, for instance, which has also a security dimension. So we are looking at that as well. There's so much being done and yet so much to do that it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops in the future. I would not like to forget the relationship with the rest of the world. At no point do we want to create a technology bubble in Europe that would not work. We do, however, have European legislation providing protections for citizens, businesses and organizations. We have to serve that, but we are really trying to do this in a way that's not only not contradictory with the rest of the world, but that's actually benefiting the rest of the world. So we're, at the moment, we are very concentrated on our objective, getting our schemes out, finishing them when they're not finished, and getting them out in the world, making them work. But there's a lot of communication being done towards outside partners across the Atlantic, on the other side of Asia. We have those contacts, and we're going to have more of those contacts when the schemes are live, in order to make sure that we have the right approach. We don't want to be a bubble again. We're not an island. We're never going to be. So we don't see this as a limes, a protection wall around Europe, but rather as a way to move cybersecurity forward globally.
Okay, so interesting future ahead of us.
I hope so.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me
All right,
today.
then.